Today, I want to talk about our normal life. Our normal life should be filled with ups and downs. And we know that, but when the down days come, we're so shocked and we don't know what to do with that. So join us today for a message from the life of David that will help us through the down times. Good morning. Welcome to our Encouraging Truth series. We are very glad you're joining us today. Today I want to encourage you with this thought. Encouraging Truth number 86 is this: normal life is filled with ups and downs. Now, when I say that, most of you are like, duh, like we know that. And I know we know that, but the problem is a lot of times we don't act like we know that, especially when our life starts crashing. When we go through down times, we start getting frustrated and we start getting mad at God and we question Him, like, why are you allowing this to happen in my life? Why am I going through such hard times? Which is why I want to remind you that normal life, the normal Christian life, is filled with ups and downs. It's filled with hills and it's filled with valleys. But God always wants to use the down times as a way to grow us up in our faith. And today we're going to see that in a big way with King David in the Old Testament as our example. For most of you, if you watch Bible study on a regular basis and you know me at all, you know I love to go bike riding. Because me, like getting out into the fresh air and riding bikes, it's like so much fun to me. It's like you feel free and you're out there with the wind blowing in your hair and you get to see new things. And I just love bike riding. But some of you, your life feels like it's a bike ride. Like everything is going great. Kids are great, money's great, job's great, relationships are great. Like everything is like a good bike ride. But the problem with bike riding is that that's when you're going downhill. But sometimes we have to go uphill. And that's when bike riding doesn't become much fun. And a lot of times the hills are so bad that we would have to get off of our bikes and walk them up the hill because it was too difficult. Some of you are in that stage of life. You're not in the like downhill, everything's great. You're in the uphill, everything's difficult. Your marriage is difficult. Your kids are difficult. Your job is difficult. You've lost, there's just bad things in your life going on right now. But what we see between the bike rides, the uphills and the downhills is that is actually life. And like I say before, that's the Christian life too. There's this weird fallacy out there that says, oh, if you're a Christian, everything's going to be fine and you're never going to have problems. That's not true. I think for a lot of people, their problems actually get worse when they become a follower of Christ. So here's what I learned from bike riding. Each day is different. Some are good, some are bad. Some are happy, some are frustrating. Some are tragic, some are joyful. And that's life. But as a follower of Jesus, we should be looking at our ups and downs in life completely differently. We should look at the down times in our life with an overarching purpose behind them. And this overarching purpose says this: God has a plan for our life. And He's in control of everything, good and bad. And this is His promise in Romans 8:28. We know that God causes all things, uphill, downhill, to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. People who don't know Jesus do not have that assurance. I feel bad for that. When someone has a problem and they don't know Christ and they don't know that there's a purpose, they just think it's random, it's chance. There's no purpose behind bad stuff. And that makes me sad for someone to have to live like that. So the question we have to ask ourselves is this: why do we have to go through bad days? Why is that as a Christian? And what we're going to learn from David is this: life is a training ground. David was in training for 15 years before he actually became king. Because God needed to train David to do a few things. Like, hey, David, you need to learn how to depend on me, God says. David, you need to learn how to look to me. You need to trust me, David. And the reason why is because God has a plan for us to grow up in our faith so we can in turn help others grow up in their faith. Here's a perfect example of this. When we had our business, at this particular time, 3 of our boys worked for the business. And Dusty was our 4th. He was just starting to learn dental stuff. So he's going to intern down in Costa Rica, where our company was. He just turned 18. Dusty gets to Costa Rica, and he's completely and utterly homesick. And as a mom, it's so heartbreaking. You don't want your kid to be miserable. So our other son, Micah, called him, and he said, Dusty, you need to get emotionally trained. He said, you need to be trained on being away from home, because the more you're away from home, the more you become stronger. It's like going to the gym. Like, it's painful because you're building muscle strength. So he said, Dusty, when you're gone for a month in Costa Rica, he said, if you come back and we ask you now to go to China for 2 weeks, is that going to be easy? And Dusty says, well, yeah, because I've already learned how to be away for 4 weeks. Exactly. It takes the bad times, the difficult times to grow us, to grow us and to get strength in the places we need to get strength in. The point to Dusty was this: hey, Dusty, you have been trained through the difficult times. That's where we need to go with this. Some of you are in a training period right now, and you hate it. I get it. Just like Dusty, you want it to be over. And see, we could have put him on a plane. We could have brought him home. We could have, he never would have learned the lessons that he needed to learn or to grow up. And I think God does the exact same thing for us spiritually. He wants us to grow up in our faith. He wants us to trust him. He wants us to cling to him. He wants us to learn how to devote ourselves to him. But here's what I know. We do not learn that in the good days. We don't. We do not learn how to trust God when things are good. We learn those lessons in the uphill days. And we see this all through the life of David, which we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. So let's talk about David. This is interesting. Abraham had 14 chapters in the Bible devoted pretty much to Abraham's life. Jacob had 11. Elijah had 10. 66 chapters are devoted to King David. There's 59 references to him in the New Testament. David was a lot of things. He was a shepherd. He was a warrior. He was a general. He was a king. He was a poet. He was a champion. David was an outlaw. He was a ladies' man. He was a musician, a prophet, a worship leader, a hero, a builder. He was an ancestor of Jesus. That's the good stuff. But his life had a lot of down days to it. A lot of his life looked like ours. Tragedy, failure, heartbreak, hurt God. For him, he had a baby that died. He had a son that literally tried to take his throne and kick David off of the throne. He had relationships with his kids that were in utter turmoil. He had family issues, children issues, work issues. He had lots of issues in his life, a lot of those uphill days where he was on his bike just trying to make it. But here's the cool part. Through it all, God called him a man after his own heart. And yet this man after God's own heart did things that you and I would never consider doing, like, I don't know, having an affair and killing the person's, husband or wife that we're having the affair with. David had multiple wives. He disobeyed God so many times. I always say, if you think the Bachelorette or the Kardashians are filled with drama, you need to read the life of King David. There's tons of drama associated with him. But God said he was a man after his own heart. Not a perfect man, but someone who had a heart for what God wants. So the reason I love David is because David had this huge impact on my life. For me, I asked Jesus in my heart when I was 7. I had no idea what that meant. I grew up going to church and still not really getting it. Was involved with Campus Crusade in high school. Ended up getting married. Not really going to church. Just not understanding what it meant to follow Christ. One day I was driving along and I said, I don't even know what this Christian thing even has to do with anything. It's not helped me in my life. Why do I even say I'm a Christian? And it was this turning point for me. I'm either going to follow Jesus or I'm not. I need to make a decision here. So I went to the Christian bookstore, and the book that jumped out at me to read was Chuck Swindell's book on the life of David. And as I read it, it literally changed my life. God used the life of David to change me, because suddenly I saw this God who was so personal. He planned me to be born. I don't know why it never occurred to me before. I came face to face with this God who I realized has been leading me all of my life. I came face to face with a God who says he has a purpose for my life. And through the life of David, I could not believe how intricately involved that God was in my everyday life, day to day. I don't know why that never clicked in my brain. So I wanted to do some encouraging truth lessons on this, because David had such an impact on my life. And what we're going to do over the next few weeks is we're going to walk with David through good days, the days where he loves God with all of his heart. And then we're going to walk with him through the bad days, when he walks away from God and when he does his own thing. And we're going to see people who love David and others who hate him. We're going to see him when he's prideful and when he's humble. We're going to see him when he trusts God and when he doubts God. We're going to see this giant killer become a man so terrified with his circumstances that he pretends to be insane. We're going to see David young, and we're going to see David on his deathbed. And what we realize and learn about David is this: David is just like you and me. Some days he gets the God thing really well, and other days he just gets the David thing. But in the end, he leaves this earth with such a passion for God, like very few people we've ever seen. And that's why I want us to be encouraged with the life of David, because in a weird sense, David is us. And my hope is that we can learn to love God through life and never give up when bad things happen. I want to read a email that I received from a woman in Louisiana. She wrote this actually a couple years ago, but I wanted to put it in here because it's this reminder of this up and down life that we see with David, or that's our life. She says this. She said, I listened to lesson 48 in the Luke series, Pushing Through Our Doubt, last night. Reminded me of the worst year of my life, 2012. My hubby filed for divorce, so we were apart for 1.5 years when God told me he wanted me back with him. Long story short, we were remarried in June of 2012, which is a good thing. There's your like downhill on the bike, like life is going great. 2 weeks later, my mom passes away from a 7-year battle with Alzheimer's. That's the uphill battle. That's going up the hill, and it's really hard. 1 month later, she said, I turned 50. That's not an up or a downhill thing. That's just a thing. The next day, my first grandbaby's born, little Brody. Great thing. It's a downhill go. Like, life is great. A month later, Brody is diagnosed with cancer and loses a kidney. That's an uphill thing, an uphill battle. 6 weeks later, my youngest brother is hit and killed by a train. Now we're still going uphill. We're off our bike and we're just panting and trying to just make it through. She said, you would think at this point I'm a mess. She says, but I'm not. Why? Because I never doubted God. She said, it took me years to get to that stage. I doubted for years. She said, my dad was killed when I was 18. My first husband beat me, left me with 2 small children. I had my doubting years. But thank God, he never gave up on me. She said, I just wanted to share that with you. She said, Brody's doing great, happy, smart, almost 4 years old, light of my life. But when I read that, it was just this realization that this is life. You're going to have good things happen and you're going to have bad things happen, and that's just life. But as a Christian, we should respond so differently. So often we think that life should turn out one way, and most of the time it actually doesn't. But when it doesn't, we need to remember that we still can make it through, knowing God, trusting him, being comforted by him, knowing that he's guiding us all along the way. And believing that whatever it is that's bad in our life, that God wants to use that to help others find Jesus. See, because we can, as Christians, we should be the ones that are joyful through the bad times. We should have a good attitude. We should respond differently to bad things than other people do. So let's get introduced to David really quick, and here's just a quick history of it. In the land of Israel at this time, there were no kings. God spoke through judges and prophets. Why would Israel need a king? Because God was their king. But the Israelites, they didn't want that. They want a king. They want a ruler. They want someone to rule over them. So at this time, there's a man by the name of Samuel. He's a judge at the time. He was a spokesperson, basically, for Israel. 1 Samuel 8:4 says this, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Look, you have grown old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint us a king to judge us and rule over us like all the other nations.'" They're looking around saying, we want to be like the other nations. They have kings, so we want a king. And Samuel's like, "God, what do I tell these people?" And God's like, "Well, here you go. The Lord said to Samuel in verse 7, "Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, Samuel, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds which they have done since the day I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, in that they have abandoned or rejected me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. So now listen to their voice. Only solemnly warn them and tell them the ways of the king who will reign over them." Here is where everything changes. Suddenly, these people want a king. And God tells them, you are making a mistake. You don't want a king. It's going to be a really bad deal from Israel. And they wanted one anyway. And finally, God said, all right, enough's enough. Have what you want. And we look at that and we go, how could they do that? How could they do that to God? And I thought to myself, I think we do the exact same thing. God gives us the Bible, His Word. He tells us in there, like, what's best for us. Hey, here's some guidelines, here's some commands, not to hurt you, but to help you in life. But we don't like that. We're like, no, God, I don't want you to tell me that. That's just not fair. I want that guy. He's not a Christian, but I want him. I want to have that affair because that makes me feel better than my husband does. I want that job, God. I want that drink. I want those drugs. And God says, no. Trust me. That's not going to be good for you. But we're just like the Israelites. We don't stop until He gives us what we think we want. And then it becomes disastrous. And that's what happened to Israel. God tells them what their life is going to look like. And they don't care. They want a king, regardless of what God says. I just think this is kind of a huge warning for all of us. That God does give us His word. He tries to tell us that affair is going to destroy your life, your marriage, your family, your kids, everything. And we're like, yeah, whatever, God. Still want it. God says, don't steal at your job. Don't lie for your boss. That's going to go really bad for you. Yeah, whatever, God. God says, don't sleep around. You might get pregnant. You might get some weird disease. I don't know. You're going to have heartache if you do that. And we're like, oh yeah, God, you just don't really know. See, we're the same kind of people that the Israelites were. Just different circumstances. So the people want a king. And here is where we meet the first king, King Saul. 1 Samuel 9:2 says this. He had a son, talking about Saul's father, and whose name was Saul. A choice and handsome man. There was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders, he was taller than any of his people. Saul becomes a king because why? He's tall and handsome, which is not a really good way to choose a king. But Saul became arrogant and depressed and jealous, and he refused to obey God. So Samuel steps in on the scene and says, hey Saul, God is taking away your throne, and He's going to give it to someone else. And that someone else would be David, King David as we know him. 1 Samuel 16:1. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." But the Lord said to Samuel, we're doing this a little bit different. "Do not look at his appearance or at his height or his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." He's saying, Samuel, when you get here to all of these sons, don't look at the tall, handsome ones. I'm not picking a king based on that. See, it's this great lesson for us that God doesn't care how we look. He doesn't care how tall we are, how skinny, how much money we have, how status. He cares deeply about our heart. Because remember, Saul was dark and handsome. But tall, dark, and handsome doesn't work if you don't have a good heart. Sometimes for me, I'm not sure I have a really good heart a lot of times. But the bottom line is, I know I want to. Like, I want to have a heart that trusts God with everything in my life. I want to have a heart that loves people. But there are days in my life when I really don't. There are days when I go, God, I don't think my heart is very good today. I don't think I'm doing very good. I don't really like the person that I am right now. God, I'm kind of scared about this. I'm kind of angry about this. And I'm a little bitter about that. But here's the difference. I don't go down that road. I stop and I say, God, the most important thing is having a heart that's devoted to you. I don't think I have one today, but I'm praying and asking you to change that for me. I think that's the kind of heart that God is looking for. So back to David, Samuel goes to see Jesse's sons, and the weird part is his son David isn't even invited to this meeting. He's out in the field with the sheep. Look at verse 10. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. David's not even there. But Samuel says to Jesse, the Lord hasn't chosen any of these. So Samuel says to Jesse, like, are these all your children? And he's like, oh, well, yeah, no, we actually forgot the youngest, okay? There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he's out tending sheep. Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. How would you feel if you were little David and you're out tending sheep and the prophet Samuel shows up at your house? Nobody even remembers to invite you. Like, that's how much of a non-issue you are. But the cool thing about God is that he knew exactly who his man was. He knew exactly where David was. David was in a field tending sheep. And when God is ready to open a door, he will do it in his timing, just like we see he did with David. Today, God's opening a door for him. Imagine someone going, hey, David, Samuel's there. You're supposed to get to this meeting. And David's running, sweaty, smelling like sheep, and wondering, what in the heck is going on? 1 Samuel 16:12 says this. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ready. David was ready with beautiful eyes and handsome appearance. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Imagine the scene. The youngest brother is anointed king. Are you joking? Imagine what the older brothers felt. Must have been a weird scene. But David's looking around going, hello, I'm not only a kid, we already have a king, King Saul. So in David's mind, he's like, oh, this is awesome. But you know what he does? He goes back to tending sheep. He's not going to go like knocking on the palace door and saying, hey, I'm the new king. I think this is why God picked David, because David didn't run out and get business cards with his new title, King David, on there. He didn't go out and get a loan for a new chariot. He didn't call and text his friends with the good news. He doesn't Snapchat or Facebook. He doesn't gloat over it to his brothers. He just went back to his day-to-day job, and he waited until God moved him forward. And see, that's how the story of David starts. A life that was created by God for a purpose, but filled, as we're going to see, with ups and downs. And I just want to remind you today that encouraging truth number 86 is this: normal life is filled with ups and downs. And this is what I know. God has never, ever forgotten you on the down parts. You're in training. You are in training when life feels down, when you're on that uphill, really difficult bike ride, when life feels like a struggle. Know this, God is using those down days as a training ground to grow your faith in Him so you can know Him better. And on the other end of those days, that uphill climb that's really difficult, when God is ready to move you and when He's trained you enough, He's going to open a door and He's going to bring you an opportunity. The guy will call, the job will become available, the ministry will take off, you will get pregnant, whatever it is, you're going to start feeling better. And that's what we're going to learn from David over the next few weeks. That normal life has times that are good and times that are bad. But the good news is that God uses the bad times to train us to do something good. And that the bad times are what gets us to know God even better. And I always say, what is better in life than knowing the Creator God of this world really, really well? And if it takes bad times for me to know Him, bring on the bad times. Hopefully that helped you today. Have a really good week.